Superheroes have always had fantastical aspects. Even predecessors like Doc Savage or Tarzan were larger than life characters that couldn't possibly exist. Amongst the thousands of superheroes in existence, Batman is held in high approval amongst a small subset of them, the ones that could actually be real. Alongside the Punisher and Iron Man, Batman is seen as grounded or a more realistic hero. In a genre full of radioactive animals, celestial beings, and alien supergods, Batman is actually the most unrealistic superhero. This isn't an insult, this is an observation. Batman is a hybrid of several different characters: Sherlock Holmes, Bruce Lee, Zorro, The Shadow, and James Bond. Yes, two of those characters appeared decades after Batman did. I will get to that. When Batman was first created by Bill Finger and stolen by Bob Kane, the main inspirations were Zorro and the Shadow, and in very subtle ways, Dracula and Sherlock Holmes. He was a masked vigilante fighting against corrupt officials, like Zorro, but he had a dark and grim persona, like the then popular radio character, the Shadow. Batman, in his crusade against crime, trained himself to the peak of human physicality, but also became a scientist. Yes, he was a scientist. So far, we have this guy who is decent at fighting, very fit, scientifically intelligent, and a great detective. Now, that's pretty insane already. An uber athletic detective scientist vigilante. Bruce Wayne wasn't this lavish playboy that everyone fawned over in the beginning. He had enough extra money from his family to where he didn't have to work and he could live comfortably. His hobby was thus being the Batman. Now here's the crux of my argument. Getting good at anything takes years of your life, let alone becoming an expert at it. You have to dedicate at least a decade of your life to become an expert at something. 10,000 hours. Now, let's assume this early version of Batman was just okay at fighting and relied more upon his guns and his batarangs. Yes, he had guns. That means this man's main skill was being a detective, a scientist, and just being very strong. To get good at those three things, let's say he spends 10 years of his life just working on them. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say he spends 10 years of his life working out, reading Neil deGrasse Tyson and How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes. He'd have to start either very young or at least when he's 18 to get good at any of them. Let's give him all the prep time he needs, just like his fans always do, and say he started at 12. Even if he started that young, and somehow a child became skilled at those things, he'd at least be 22. Now let's go with that. In a more realistic way, he would start at 20 and he'd get good at all of that by 30. But let's say it's 22, he's in peak shape, a scientific genius, and a decent detective. Now Batman moves on, and by the 1960s, the influence of James Bond starts to affect him. He's no longer just some guy in a bat costume. He's a lavish playboy millionaire who's on magazine covers. Science is a lot like anime. It's not one thing, but an entire buffet of things. Over 100 branches of science exist. Batman needs to pick a branch then. At least a few. But the funny thing is, he never does. Batman, in his origin, just says he becomes a scientist, which is pretty standard and broad, but this brings into question a lot of things then. He goes from just a guy in a plane and some guns to having an entire fortress of bat-themed vehicles and weapons. This means Batman must be well versed in mechanical engineering, computer science, and also be a chemist. So on top of the skills he's already learned, to be good at any one of those three branches of science, it'd have to take at least 30 years. But let's again give him the benefit of the doubt, and let's say it's just closer to 20. That means Batman has to have been 42 by the time he starts his crusade against crime. As time went on, Batman also picked up other skills and influences. By the mid-70s, martial arts films had captured the imagination of America. Bruce Lee became a huge sensation and attracted an endless amount of imitators. And by the 1980s, ninjas became the next big fad. With these two trends, martial arts became a huge part of Batman's persona, to the point where he even trained in several different forms of it. Probably just like one or two, right? Let's say he was able to train and study all those martial arts around the same time. Let's give him as much time as possible. Let's add another 20 years to that counter. This isn't even getting into his training with Zatara on becoming an escape artist. So let's add another 10 years to that. With all these skills Batman has, if he began training at 12 and he has the most optimal experience to become an expert at all of these things, he'd have to start his crusade against crime at 62 years old. That's not even considering the fact that he would be torn between running his family's multi-billion-dollar industry and keeping up a social life just for looks. Any person can tell you juggling a regular job and a social life is hard. Imagine running a gigantic corporation and creating a fake social life on top of that. Something needs to be made 1000% clear here. I love Batman. The idea of somebody not being a fan of Batman is genuinely bizarre to me. There's a reason DC makes him their flagship character. He has a universal appeal. He's the superhero version of Gold. Malleable, one of a kind, and can be turned into anything. He's the peak male fantasy, but that's what's charming about him. The Nolan movies have painted him as being grounded, but really, Batman's everlasting appeal is how he can adapt to the times. I'm Brainboy, and I'm going to bed now. Goodbye.